Thank you for joining us tonight. And I'm super excited to talk about Olympic lifting and triathlon and what we can do with that. And, I was really excited when I saw this opportunity, when USA weightlifting and USA triathlon combined forces. I kind of reached out and jumped on that because I spent a good 5 years actually competing in Olympic lifting after my professional triathlon career and have been coaching since 2001. And so a lot of experience integrating, Olympic lifting, strength programming, being a professional athlete myself, coaching people for a long time, but then just really getting immersed into the Olympic lifting world as an athlete and competed. I even went to the Masters World Cup and, competed on the Arizona stages and did that really primarily as a sport for 5 years. So getting the opportunity to, look at combining those two together and having experience programming for it and teaching it and being certified actually as a Olympic lifting coach, that was, I saw that and I thought this will be I felt excited to teach everybody about this topic. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we'll jump right in and I'll share my screen. And if anybody has questions, you can drop them in the chat. And well, Senator Marilyn. So obviously we all know why we're here, Olympic lifting for triathletes.
Yeah, so you can go ahead and click right through that. So like I just explained, just really excited to get to share this with you. And I hope you all at least take away one thing, more educated about what Olympic lifts are, how to possibly incorporate them for triathletes, why you might do it, why you might not do it. A lot of people, they get a little bit confused with strength training, like what the different lifts are. And I just really want to make sure that I take some time to educate you on what actually Olympic lifts are. And then some of the supplementary lifts that could be useful for triathletes. So, there's strength training, but then there's in particular Olympic lifts. So that's the big difference. So when we look at strength training, is that, the core and mobility that we see a lot of, physical therapy type stuff, single leg type stuff, what that all looks like. But we really want to dive into what are Olympic lifts. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about, what are they called? So the most common, the full clean. And this can be really useful for, like I said, improving speed, leg strength, power. Olympic lifting is a very, very high skilled sport. So if you think of it in terms of like golf, swimming, there's a lot of skill involved. And so we want to make sure that you start with, again, understanding what the lifts are. So a full clean, and that means going down into a full squat position. And once you catch the weight from, the front rack position there, and why you would even do this, right? And I definitely want people to jump in and ask questions, and we'll leave some time for questions at the end. But there's a big difference between full clean, power clean, hip clean. So these are all different terminology that you might hear of when you talk about Olympic lifts. But the very, very basic is full clean. So that's from the floor, the start position, and it's broken into a very technical, the first pull, the second pull, which is high up on the toes and a big shrug, and it's an actual jump. I'll get into later the difference between closed chain and open chain type exercises. And then you actually, for speed, drop underneath the weight and then receive it, and you actually come up out of the full clean position with a lot of leg strength and a lot of speed. So very different than something like closed chain squats for strength and that kind of thing. So just a lot of technical movement and a lot of power and speed in the full clean. Go ahead. So power clean, you might use that a little bit more with triathletes. The full clean isn't going to be too many triathletes that are using that movement. But the power clean you see a little bit more commonly. And that's where we're not going to go down into a full squat, and we're just going to work on the speed and the technical aspect and that open chain, really, really aggressive jump up. So that's something that you'll see. It's still from the ground, and there's a tall, shrug with the shoulders, up on the toes, and an explosive jump, and then we catch the weight, and we don't actually go all the way down into a full squat. So this might be something that you see a lot more triathletes use. And still, again, you want to work with really, really light weights, make sure that you work with someone in person with the technique aspect. A lot of Olympic lifting coaches, we start with just a broomstick or a PVC pipe and really, really dial down the speed first and the technique first, and then start to increase weight. So that's really important to consider when you do this. But because triathletes already, we're already maybe not there's a lot of mobility that's necessary for the full clean, and maybe we're already a little bit tired in the legs. You can work on speed and power and get a lot out of the Olympic lift just doing a power clean. So we don't necessarily need to drop down to that full clean right into that big bottom position. All right, so the next one is, and I just, I'm going to go through all of the lifts because some of them we're going to use and some of them I would say, hey, this really isn't for triathletes. But my whole purpose of this is that I want to educate you on the different movements, right? So if we're talking, like I said, about something like a different sport, powerlifting, you're going to be looking at bench press, deadlift, squat. But Olympic lifts in particular, so the clean is the one movement, the snatch is the other one. And this is even more skill-based, okay? So if you're working with athletes, they've got to have really, really good mobility in their shoulders, really good positioning with the bar, a lot of speed with the snatch. Definitely going down into a full snatch, there's going to be a lot of mobility in the hips and the ankles, and really, really accurate in terms of technique. So if you're teaching your athletes how to do this, start with checking their mobility first. Can they get into a good overhead position with just a PVC pipe? Can they get down into a full bottom position with their ankles and their hips? And that might be where you start with them. And then again, next it's a lot of speed, right? It's a lot of speed and technique and power. And so even just doing that with the movement with really light weight or no weight at all could be where you start a triathlete and say, this is enough for what we're looking for before you add any weight at all. Most triathletes, I would recommend starting with a power clean and then moving to full cleans, and snatch being one of the very last ones. If you've got a really, really young, talented athlete that is, could benefit a lot from this movement and has the mobility to do it and has that kind of power and speed, then this would be the very last one of the two Olympic lifts that I would introduce to a triathlete. And I would always keep the weight pretty light. So again, it starts from the floor and then it ends up overhead. And with this whole presentation, I'm going through just the very basics. All of these, because they are so technical, we could dive into an entire weekend course of working with you in person of what that technique looks like. And so, once you're become familiar with these movements, I really encourage all of you to, go online, watch some videos of what this looks like, watch some videos at USA Weightlifting of instructors teaching these movements, even give it a try yourself, that kind of thing. So again, just like the clean, there is always the option for the power, the power movement. And that's where we don't go down into that full squat position at the bottom. And so where everything's still the same, you're starting from the floor, you're concentrating on the big power, the big explosive movement up. It's a jumping motion, very, very technical, ending in overhead position, but we don't go right down to a bottom position. So you're getting the benefits of the speed, you're getting the benefits of the power, you're getting the strength from pulling off the floor, but you're not putting the athlete under as much stress as going down into the full clean squat or full snatch squat. And if mobility on an athlete isn't as good, then this is probably, if you're like, okay, they're ready for the snatch and we would like to start to incorporate this a little bit, but they're not quite flexible enough to get down into that full bottom position, you can work with them with the power snatch. Again, still staying really light with the weights to start with. Okay, so this is so now we're familiar with the two main movements with Olympic lifts and what they are and where I encourage you to direct most triathletes with the power clean and the power snatch, and being primarily the clean is the focus for triathletes. But then you can get into, okay, where could we build some strength in some supplementary exercises? And most of us are familiar with squats, right? But I think one of the things that we aren't most familiar with as triathletes is the different types of squats that you can do. So there's something called a low bar squat and a high bar squat. In Olympic lifts, it's most commonly that we use the high bar squat, okay? And that's placement of where the bar is on your shoulders. And you're going down a lot of hip, a lot of ankle flexibility. So you really want to do a good mobility screening on your athletes and make sure that they're able to handle this. And it's a straight up and down movement. So you basically sit down into the bottom of the heels and have that bar high up, and we get really deep into the squat. So that is what Olympic lifting squats typically look like. Very, very different than a low bar squat, which is still quite useful for athletes who maybe have a little bit less flexibility. We still want to build strength in the legs. And maybe if you have an athlete that has like a little bit of a knee injury, or they're a little bit older and they just don't have that flexibility to get down that low, the angles you can see in the little demo people there aren't as aggressive. And how you achieve this is there's a placement of the bar. You can see it's much further back on the back. It's further down, and you still concentrate on the bar going straight up and down. It's a straight line from where the bar is right through the middle of your feet. So as you go down, you almost sit back like you're sitting back in a chair, and then drive up from the middle of the foot straight up. So you can see in both cases, that bar is straight up and down through the middle of the foot, but the angles on the athlete's knees and ankles are quite a bit different from one another. So just to know, when most people are talking about Olympic lifting squats, they're talking about a high bar squat, but you can do low bar squats. That's more going to be a powerlifting type squat. Very useful. I think most triathletes would benefit more from a low bar squat for building pure leg strength. And it's a little bit more of a, what we would call more closed chain, not as hard on the knees and the joints and the hips, that kind of thing. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the next one, if we still have an athlete that's okay, we really need to build their leg strength, we can use the squats. We're going to use power cleans. We're not quite ready for something like full cleans or snatches, but we're going to say we're going to do power cleans. And I really want to build their leg strength, but they have some kind of knee injury or hip injury, or they're not quite advanced enough to handle some of these more advanced movements. But we still really want to gain the benefits of the leg strength from the squats. So you can do something called box squats. And that's where you set, the higher the box, obviously, the better. And the lower the box, there's going to be a little bit more load on the legs. But I recommend that you just bring it down to about chair height, or 90 degrees. And this really is going to teach the athlete to sit back to the box. When they do that, the thing that you're watching for as a coach is that they don't actually relax and sit down on the box. So they want to always be staying engaged. It's still a very much engaged. It's like a cue that they go down to the box, barely touch it with their bottom, and then straight back up out of the bottom. With the Olympic lifts, I talked about, if you do have an athlete that's, getting down into the full clean or full snatch, there's a real speed. I talk about speed coming out of the bottom. And with box squats, one of the things that you can do, if you even have an advanced athlete and you're saying, okay, we want to use the box squat to build their leg strength, you can work at different tempo. Okay, so it's good for cues of learning for beginners, but you can also really use a different tempo. So you can say, we're going to go down nice and slow. There's a 2-to-1 tempo, down and stay engaged all the way to the box, and then explosive out of the top. And this is the box just allows a little bit more of a cue for someone who's a beginner at that kind of stuff, and gives them like a spot to sit back to when they're learning this technique and learning that leg strength. Okay. All right, another one is deadlifts. So this is a good one for triathletes. Now, for a you know, for less experienced triathletes, or less experienced lifters that need the strength, the pulling strength, they call it, posterior, really good posterior strength. When we swim, bike, and run, we spend a lot of time hunched over, and our upper back, our whole posterior chain, calves, hamstrings, glutes, all that stuff, it needs to really be developed because we're overdeveloped on the front end, right? We're spent a lot of time hunched over. So spending time developing the posterior chain on triathletes is really helpful, not only for injury prevention, but performance. So deadlifts, if we've got like a less experienced athlete or someone who lacks a bit of technique or mobility, then you might use something called a trap bar deadlift. That's going to allow for some pulling strength, still some really good positions. You can put a little bit more weight on, but it's not as technical as a deadlift. The other type of deadlift you could do is just the straight deadlift, where you're starting from the ground. Really teaching people good position before adding weight is key, and that's keeping a nice flat back, sitting back on the heels, keeping the upper back really, really engaged. The most common mistake I see from triathletes is they end up putting on just a little bit too much weight for them, and they lack the upper back strength to really keep that bar close to their shin and up their body, and it pulls them into that rounded back position. And that's when you see them round their back and end up with a little, you know, a tweak in the hamstring or a tweak in their lower back. So if you start with lightweight and really focus on teaching an athlete to engage the upper back and keep good position, you know, keep that bar tight against the shin and pull it up, you're going to develop that good posterior chain without having to use a lot of weight. It's not necessarily about the amount of weight that you're lifting as much as really engaging that posterior chain and pulling, driving the feet through the floor. So that's really, really the big thing with deadlifts. The other type, I think, I'm not sure if I put it on the next slide. Just go ahead one more slide here ahead. Yeah, so the other most useful form of deadlifting for triathletes, I would say a classic deadlift from the floor for triathletes isn't as useful as what the trap bar deadlift, but the most useful form of deadlift for a triathlete it's called an RDL. And that's the Romanian deadlift is the long version of that. And this is going to be really, really specific to engaging that upper back, and you really go down in a slow 2-to-1 tempo, and there's not the same kind of knee bend. So in a classic deadlift or trap bar deadlift, you can really allow your athlete to bend the knees and drive the feet through the floor and stand up, right? With the RDL, we keep the knees, they have a slight bend in them, but they're fairly straight. And we sit the butt back and really focus on a real slow, engaged, holding the bar against the thigh, against the shin, down to about mid shin. The difference between the deadlift and the RDL is the deadlift goes from the floor every single time, and RDL is going to only go to about mid shin, where we can keep that engaged upper back and that nice flat back all the way through. You should really feel it in the hamstrings and the glutes. And then when they come back up nice and more explosively on the tempo there. So that's the one I recommend the most for triathletes. All right, we can't talk about Olympic lifts and not talk about jerks, okay? So jerks are a part of Olympic lifting. So if we're becoming familiar as triathlon coaches with the sport of Olympic lifting and incorporating it, I want to teach you about all the lifts. So we've learned about the clean a little bit and what I recommend there for programming and for triathletes. Learned about the snatch. The next one is called jerks. Jerk is the finishing lift from the actual, in competition, it's called the clean and jerk. So there's two lifts in Olympic lifts. That's the clean and jerk and then the snatch. So the jerk can be trained independently from the clean when Olympic lifters train. I don't necessarily recommend jerks for any triathletes. I don't really see any benefit in it at all. There is a huge amount of leg drive up. It's actually, it's commonly confused that it's an upper body exercise. Pressing overhead like a shoulder press or a front press, that's different. That is working the upper body. Jerks are actually where the bar is sitting on your front rack and you explosively jump it into the air and you actually jump underneath the bar and catch it. So there's a lot of speed, there's a lot of technique, and it's a big power drive from the legs. I don't see a whole lot of benefit for this for triathletes. I think if they want to learn it, there's two, there's a power jerk, there's a split jerk is the most common one. I really feel like it's good to be educated on it and know what it is, but I don't think that there's really much benefit for triathletes to being doing jerks of any kind. It's not going to be something that's going to help your swimming. It's not upper body related at all. You're going to get just as much power, if not more power and speed from doing cleans for a triathlete than necessarily a jerk. But it's definitely, you want to know what it is, know what it looks like, and know whether it's something that if someone mentions it, whether they should do it or not. Something to try, but not something I recommend. Okay, so another one when we go in terms of the deadlift, we're kind of jumping back and forth just a tiny bit here. If you do have an athlete that you say, they really need some posterior chain strength and they need, they really could benefit from that pulling strength and that upper back, hamstring, glute type strength, but we're struggling to get them to pull from the floor with the deadlift or even the trap bar. And RDLs, maybe they lack a little bit of strength or mobility to be able to do that. Another thing that you can do is something called lockouts or racked deadlifts. I don't know if you guys, I'm starting to echo back at myself. I don't know if you got that. So this is where you actually need something called blocks, or you need an actual squat rack or something to put the weights up on and start it at about mid shin. This is going to allow your athletes to maintain better positioning and stay even. And we hope that this year. Are you guys hearing that? You're hearing that too?
Yeah, so, you're good. We just had someone come off mute.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so with the lockouts and rack deadlifts, you can, if you've got an athlete that actually can handle a little bit more weight, they need a little bit more weight on the bar to actually gain the strength that you need, but pulling it from the floor is a struggle in terms of mobility or injury, or we're worried about them having the mobility to do that, or maybe the experience, but you're like thinking to yourself, I really think they need to lift a little heavier weight. You can use something called the lockouts or rack deadlifts. So again, you find this is going to be most commonly used in an actual gym. You find a squat rack, set it up about mid shin height, and you're going to have them maintain the exact same body positions as you would in the actual deadlift, that same tight pulling motion, setting the upper back, using the posterior chain, but it's going to be from about mid shin and then just stand straight up with it. Okay. All right, now another one that you can use, and this would always be, this is kind of like the RDL, very, very lightweight, again, focused on the posterior chain. I'm giving you guys lots of options on posterior chain stuff because I think it's the most important thing for triathletes when we're looking at, supplementary exercises with the Olympic lifts and when I walk you through the programming of it, the exercises that you're going to choose for athletes, I think triathletes have the most to benefit from strengthening their posterior chain. So if we're looking at speed, power, leg strength, and posterior chain are the number one things that we're wanting to work on with triathletes with these types of lifts. So another good supplementary exercise is called good mornings. You just rest the bar on the back there. Same thing, very, very slow and accurate on the tempo. Go down on a 2 tempo, back up on a 1 tempo. And, again, lighter weight, good body positioning, and focusing on the tempo is always going to be more beneficial for triathletes than increasing weight. So that's the thing I can't encourage enough for us as coaches as we, introduce this type of lifting for our athletes. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Okay, so equipment needs. So a lot of people, when they start this stuff, most triathletes just have their runners that they run in, which is totally fine. But if they're really going to start to incorporate Olympic lifts into their program regularly, I think, if they're just going to be doing the supplementary exercises and squats, you want to do that in a nice flat shoe. And honestly, you could buy a pair of Chuck Taylors. Those are really good. But we want to stay away from squishy, high sneakers. So Hoka's would be kind of a problem for these types of things. A lot of the runners that your athlete might say, hey, I can just use the runners that I run in all the time. I would encourage them to get them just a real flat shoe, like a pair of sneakers, Chuck Taylors, something like that. If they're going to specifically be doing the Olympic lifts, like the snatch, the clean and jerk, the cleans, encourage them to get actual Olympic lifting shoes. Okay, you can find those online. Nike, Adidas, they've got a real solid platform. They've got a lot of stability to them. They've got a little heel lift in them, which is also going to help for triathletes that have limited mobility in their ankles and hips. So you're not only you're going to prevent a lot of injuries by making sure that your athletes have the right equipment. With Olympic lifting, it's a different bar than it is when you just go to like an LA Fitness or a regular gym. The bar that is at most of those gyms and the squat racks are more powerlifting bars. They're 45 pounds, they're longer, and they don't spin. So an actual Olympic lifting bar, they spin. So if you're doing cleans and snatches, make sure your athlete has an actual Olympic lifting bar. You can get different weighted bars for beginners, as light as 15 pounds, but all men and women actually compete in Olympic lifting on different bars. So the women's bars are shorter and they're only 35 pounds, and men's bars are longer and they're 45 pounds. So if you're going to specifically be doing Olympic lifting with your athletes, they need to know that. Free weights. So again, you want to use the bumpers for Olympic lifting, not the metal plates. So again, if you're teaching this, there's not too many of the local gyms that actually have bumper plates. A lot of them are in kilos and not pounds. So make sure if you're adding up the weight for your athletes, or they know that what weight they're actually lifting. The colored plates are often in kilos, so know what that is. It's usually times 2.2 for most of them, and making sure that they are the actual bumper plates that you can drop. So a bar that spins, make sure you're on a male or female bar and that you're on actual bumper plates and you have good Olympic lifting shoes, and that's going to help you prevent a lot of injuries right there. And then racks for squats. As we get into these home gyms, that kind of thing, you're seeing some people, you've got some homemade gym stuff and they're doing squats where they're trying to pick stuff up off the floor and then get it up and that kind of thing. I really encourage your athletes to get a proper rack and make it safe for them. The big thing about equipment is you want to know what you need so that it's safe, the same way you will for the pool or the bike or something like that. Invest in good equipment. Okay, so I'm not going to obviously read this whole slide out to you. You can kind of take a look at it, but the big thing is deciding whether your athlete needs open chain, which is the Olympic lifts, that's an open chain exercise, or closed chain. So when we're talking about deadlifts or we're talking about squats, those, and especially the low bar squats, that's going to be more of a closed chain exercise. And open chain is more explosive and a jumping type exercise. So when you're looking at these and you're trying to decide on the right programming for your athlete, really make sure that you know the difference. And it means closed chain, your feet don't leave the ground. Open chain, they do leave the ground. If you're programming for an athlete a lot of running, or they do have knee injuries, anything that is open chain is going to be a lot of impact. Okay, so when you're deciding these exercises, do you want to build leg strength? Do you want to build power? Do you want to build speed? What kind of injury do they have? So really knowing what you're choosing for your athlete is important. So if you've got a little bit older athlete that is already taking a lot of pounding to their body, running a lot, these kinds of things, you might stay closer to the closed chain stuff, keep their feet planted firmly on the ground. And they're going to get a lot of leg strength from that. You can change the tempo of the lifts, and you're going to keep them much safer while you build their leg strength up. If you've got a collegiate athlete who is, trying to run a really fast 5K, maybe even doing some, 800-meter track type runs, 1,500 meters, that kind of stuff, then they're doing draft legal racing. They need a lot of power and punch out of the corners, the draft legal racing. they're able to handle the open chain just a little bit more, you're trying to develop that speed and that power, then that's when we would start to do that under really good supervision and know that this is a real explosive movement where our feet leave the ground, and really understand the impact of that, right? If you are jumping and landing with a lot of weight, what is that doing to your athlete in terms of total training load over, as you add in the bike and the run around that type of stuff. Okay. Okay, so this is where I see the most common mistakes for when people start to add in lifting is they try and approach lifting the same way they approach triathlon. And in triathlon, it's a volume sport, right? We do a lot of reps. We do in terms of, let's talk about volume. That's, most people are doing, if you're doing even 5-6 hours of exercise a week, 10 hours, 15, 20, whatever those hours a week, it's a volume sport. It's an endurance sport. And so one of the common mistakes I see coaches and athletes make is they decide that they're going to try a little bit of lifting and they think more is better. And they think if I do it faster in terms of, supersetting or going from one to the next as quickly as possible, they treat their gym work or their lifting the same way they do their triathlon training. And that is, number one, it's not going to be beneficial for really getting what you need out of the lifts, but it's also the quickest way to get injured. So when we program, you'll want to work just like you would your normal triathlon program. You've got your main event and you work backwards in terms of dates, where you want your peak performance. And so if we're looking at, a 4 to 6 month block and you're the furthest out, just like we would build a base period in swim, bike, and run, in lifting, there is a base period when it comes to things like the closed change exercises. So deadlifts, squats, those kinds of things you can do, high rep, and high rep might be, like I've said here, 3x15, 4x10. It's at a low percentage of their max, and they're building a great big base. You would not do that with the actual Olympic lifts. So the clean and jerk, and the snatch. That is always going to be programmed on it might have some volume to it, but it would look something more like, 6x3 for reps. There's a lot of rest and sitting in between them. You might even do like some kind of complex, those kinds of things. So I'm not going to get into the actual like depth of the different types of programming. If afterwards people want to contact me, and I'm happy to, show them sample programs, that kind of things. But the base period, just like our triathlon training, needs to be far out. And that might last 3 to 4 weeks. And then you would move into a little bit heavier weights. And we start to go to something, less reps, heavier weight. So it might be something like 5x8 or, that type of thing. It's going to be less actual reps and heavier weight. And then when we get closer to the peak period of your strength, that's when we get down to even 6x5, 5x3, 6x2. And as these sets and reps change, the weight changes, the total load changes. So, when we're working in 3x15, 4x10, we might be working at, 75, 80% of someone's max, depending on what their max is. As we're getting into that 6x5, 5x3, and especially 6x2, once you're at sort of 6x2, you're working at, 90, 95%, maybe even higher of someone's max, and they're building a lot of strength there. We don't want to go to 6x2 before we've done the base period. It's just like saying we're going to go on the track and do speed work before we've done the easy running and the miles to prepare for that. So with all of these lifts, there is an actual, progression and programming that you work backwards to competition. That's really important. All right. Yeah. Now I'm not sure if I cover it a little bit later, but one thing I want to make sure I mention as well is with these types of lifting, for most triathletes, twice a week is more than enough, spread 48 to 72 hours apart. And for a lot of triathletes, once a week is enough, okay? Because there is a high load to this type of lifting. So you might program for them where you do core work 1 day a week and supplementary stuff with, single leg and core work and dumbbells and that kind of stuff. And this, more taxing type Olympic lifting and these really big recruitment closed chain exercises like deadlifts and squats, you might only do it once a week with your triathletes. So again, we're not approaching this type of work the same way we do our triathlon programming. And that is really, really important to know as you mesh these two things together. So again, who, why, and when. So this is not for everybody. So in saying that, we really want to be smart as coaches of who we prescribe this stuff to. Look at their age, look at their mobility, look at what they're actually training for. I do think that there is a benefit in sprint, ITU, collegiate athletes, like I say, doing the speed and power movements. They're going to have maybe a little bit more mobility. If you're racing Ironman, if you lack the mobility, it's not going to be, there's going to be more risk than reward. So you might stick a little closer to, the core work and that kind of stuff. So really smart in terms of who you're choosing this type of work for and understanding the load of it. And if you're looking at it as, hey, this is purely like a mobility and skill and technique supplement to their program, and you're working with PVC pipes and really, really lightweight, that might be a way that you're just increasing some of your athletes' overall mobility, and you're not really using it for developing speed and strength. So that could be something that you're looking for as well. You always, these are the icing on the cake, this type of stuff for triathletes. So you always want to ask yourself, is this going to make them better at swim, bike, and run? And is the risk and reward ratio adequate for that athlete? And that's something you really want to make sure of when you're looking at adding this to them. Ideally, they're doing it supervised, or they have a lot of experience at it. You're right there with them. Most Olympic lifting gyms have a coach with them full-time in person, watching every single lift, just because they are really, really technical. And again, I think, if you're going to be incorporating this, especially the base period, and it should be done more in the off season. Once you start to get into those really intense workouts with triathlon, and you're getting in that 12-week window of an A race, you're probably going to take out this kind of work, and it's going to be something you're doing through the winter, or maybe this is something you're doing through a whole pandemic year. I mean, this is, if you're going to incorporate this and it's something new and we're not looking at racing for a long time, this could be something fun to teach them. So and the one thing I'll just, before we moved on there, that I saw there that I didn't cover is that if you do have athletes, with the closed chain workouts, some of the higher rep closed chain work in the base building phase can help connective tissue thicken a little bit. So if you've got an athlete that is a little bit injury prone, that there is some benefits to doing that for, if you're doing something like box squats, or you're doing low bar squats that are really safe, and you're doing them in that 3x15 range, at, light to medium weight, that, and at the good tempo, at that rate, it would be 1-to-1 tempo. There is some benefit in strengthening and thickening up those tendons and ligaments for athletes that maybe struggle in their in season when they get into, the real quality triathlon work and get injured. So that's something that you can consider in your programming as well. Again, I'm sort of repeating a little bit of what I've already covered, but I can't stress it enough, and that's why I keep bringing it up. Mobility with Olympic lifting and these types of lifts is really, really important, and maybe that's where you start and why you're even introducing this to your triathlete. Ankle mobility is typically the biggest limiter. Next is hip mobility, so you really want to make sure that those are the two places that they have that ability before you even introduce this stuff. And then again, into the shoulder mobility. So those, with the snatch and even with the clean, that front rack position requires quite a lot of shoulder mobility. So when you can get an athlete into that good front rack position, they need a ton of mobility in the shoulder to be able to hold that properly. And that is very important, because if an athlete catches a clean and they don't have the mobility to hold the bar in the correct place, it's going to tip them forward and they're going to lose their positioning, and now you're putting them at a little bit of risk. So ankles, hips, shoulders, really making sure that that's assessed well, and you pay a lot of attention to that. When I was competing in Olympic lifting, we'd spend 30 minutes before even touching a PVC pipe for a warm-up doing mobility. As a huge part of the training. So something to know. And then again, start with the technique, just like you would with swimming. PVC pipe, I know even some of the best lifters in the world, they start every warm-up with just simply a PVC pipe, and really watch your athlete that they've nailed down those positions and the technique very, very well before ever putting any weight on. Technique and speed come first. Once we've got the technique and speed down, then that's when we can start to add little weights by little weights. And the increases on weights is very, very small. Okay. Okay, so I got into this a little bit already. And the big thing is making sure you're placing this type of training in your programming. Now, everybody programs their triathlon training just a little bit differently, where they place quality sessions within the week, where they place recovery sessions. It's going to be dependent from athlete to athlete. And the big thing is making sure that you're not doing too much too often with this type of work. Again, like I say, 72 hours to 48 hours apart from one another, and that they're doing it when they're as fresh as possible. So possibly after a recovery day, early in the week, as their first session of the day. You want to make sure that it's not too close to any kind of quality, that you're really expecting a lot of quality out of them, maybe a track session or a really high quality bike. You want to make sure that it's really where you put it in terms of your programming should be thought out really, really carefully. Those recovery weeks are going to be important. Deload the weight and take the Olympic lifting right out on the recovery weeks. Another mistake, some people, I'll hear them say, well, I had a recovery week with triathlon, but I really went for it in the gym. You want to make sure that you're deloading. If anything, you would keep the triathlon training going and completely deload any kind of strength training or Olympic lifting on the light weeks, and making sure that I can't, stress enough that how much load this has on you. These are real explosive movements, and so it needs to be treated like that. Okay, I want to give you guys a little bit of an example program. So a lot of people, maybe Monday might be like a recovery day. They just do an easy swim or something like that. Or even some athletes will have a day off on Monday after a big weekend. And so this Tuesday morning might be the best place to put this type of work. And like I said, with cleans and snatches, those kinds of things, the reps, you might have many sets, but not that many reps within sets. And that's how you're building them up. So something like 5x3 power cleans. And then the supplementary work is where you can get a little bit more volume. So, high bar back squats, 3x10 if they're in a base phase. RDLs and the good mornings are always going to be on the lower rep range of things. So staying in that 6x5 range, that's okay, 5x5, but we don't need a lot of sets and reps with the RDLs and the good mornings, those types of exercises. And then again, because for triathletes, we really lack a lot of upper body strength, I think you can benefit a lot from adding things like dumbbell rows, cable rows, but anything that can really build that upper back and posterior chain strength is going to be good. And then you finish it out with core work. So you'll notice it's not very long. Another mistake triathletes will make with their programming and this stuff is they'll try and do too many exercises. They've got a list of 15 different exercises and, all these reps and sets, and they're in there for an hour and they're going very quickly from one thing to the next. When you approach this type of training, it should be, you do cleans one day, you do your supplementary leg strength stuff, your supplementary posterior chain stuff. It's, a total of 3 to 5 exercises. It might take you an hour to do all that because you rest completely between each of the lifts, but you're actually not doing, 15 to 20 different exercises. At the end, if your athlete if they're really ambitious and they feel like they need to do a lot more when they go to the gym, give them a lot of core work, give them a ton of abs, give them as much planks and crunches and V-ups and mountain climbers and all that stuff that they can handle. Um, then you're going to go, Thursday might be another day, maybe Wednesday, maybe Tuesday morning you do that, and then you do a hard bike in the afternoon or something. Wednesday might be a little bit more of an aerobic day, like an easy run or an easy bike or an easy swim or something. And then Thursday morning is, or you could say Thursday is another quality day, and you'd start the Thursday out with, again, you start the day out with the strength and the lifting, so they're not going into these tired. They're going to be able to hold the positions better. They're going to get the most speed out of it. They're going to have the leg strength to be able to do it. I put the harder stuff, I don't know if you noticed this, the harder stuff earlier in the week, and the stuff like low bar back squats, and that kind of stuff later in the week. That's probably, if your athlete's going to be a little more tired, it is going to be later in the week. So what you give them early in the week, the speed stuff, the power stuff, that kind of stuff might be earlier in the week. And then, the little bit more closed chain stuff and strength building stuff when they're a bit tired and maybe moving a little slower anyways might be later in the week. So low bar back squats, deadlifts with the trap bar or rack deadlifts, the good mornings, some dumbbell pullovers, that type of stuff, but really not getting into too much explosive and speed stuff later in the week when your athlete might already be carrying quite a bit of fatigue. So you're going to know your athletes and know where they're going to handle this best. You also know how you program, but I'm just giving you examples of how you should be thinking about this stuff. And when you're considering this, where your brain should be directing the actual programming and keeping your athletes getting the most out of adding this, but also keeping them safe and not getting injured from adding this kind of stuff. Okay, next one. Yeah, so again, I just give a little bit of a, example here. So just like I said there, freshest in the morning, followed by aerobic work or some kind of tempo work, that kind of, if you're already doing a lot of triathlon coaches that we obviously do sport specific strength stuff. So paddle work in the pool, hill works on the run, big gear work on the bike, that kind of stuff. So if you're already doing strength work in the morning, you can also then decide, am I going to train the opposing energy system later in the afternoon? Okay, so you want to make sure that you know your athlete really well and say, okay, I don't want to just hammer strength on Tuesday morning and then hammer strength, sport specific strength on Wednesday, and then again back in the gym on Thursday morning and then back at that. So you're separating what you're working so that they're actually getting the load and then the recovery, and then the load and the recovery, and possibly even, like I say, programming it with polarized training, the energy system that you're going to use. So if we're doing something like the strength in the morning on Tuesday, maybe you're doing some kind of speed, leg speed type session or something like that in the afternoon, so that you're not, athletes fall flat and go stale, or they get injury or get a little bit chronic when we tend to overdo the repetition of hitting the same energy system over and over and over again. So you want to avoid that. There's a stress and then a recovery, and that there's you're working one energy system and then going to a different one. So again, if we're doing that strength and the power and the speed stuff on Tuesday morning, a little bit of opposite energy system in the afternoon, and then Wednesday would be primarily, you would be allowing them to recover. The nervous system is really, when you do Olympic lifts, the nervous system is affected big time. That type of speed and that type of power and that open chain type stuff, so the cleans and the snatches, that's the nerve, and that kind of weight and movement with moving weight that fast, there's a big impact on the nervous system. So you want to not only be taking into account the total load and what that does to the body, but also the nervous system, what that does to the body. Right. Okay, so hopefully I haven't run through this too fast for everybody. I know it's St. Patty's Day, so maybe some of you guys have some St. Patty's Day plans. But yeah, just the conclusion, I know I've given you pretty broad paintbrushes on an introduction to Olympic lifting. You can dive very deep into, different types of programming as you get more advanced. I think when we're looking at how are we going to make Olympic lifting beneficial for triathletes, the biggest things that we want to take away is making sure that we choose the right exercises for your athlete, that we program it right within the week for them, that we always go with safety first, technique, the right equipment, and making sure that their mobility is good to be able to handle what you're doing. And then you're really closely monitoring, is this benefiting their swim, bike, and run? Am I making them a better athlete at their sport by incorporating this? And so those are the things that we want to make sure of while we take on this. I think there is a lot of benefit, you know, if we can make athletes stronger, more resilient, quicker, more powerful. And it's our responsibility as coaches that we educate ourselves as much as possible to understand the impact of these types of exercises and how we would incorporate them. I think if you're interested in learning a lot more about this in depth, you know, with USAT and USAW, that they've combined forces, I know that there's a lot of great actual weightlifting, you know, just like you can go get certified as a USAT triathlon coach, you can go get certified as a USA weightlifting coach. And you know, I think if you're going to start incorporating this, I would take the time to learn the lifts yourself and go through an Olympic lifting program and get certified as an Olympic lifting coach, and really know what it means to do the sport, understand the sport, really understand the technique. What does it feel like to have a barbell in my hands? You know, have, you know, chalk, the right equipment, the squat racks. How does this make me feel? How tired am I? How does this affect the bike, the run, you know, my flexibility, all of these things, and then start teaching it to your athletes. So yeah, hopefully hopefully I've provided just a little bit of insight on Olympic lifting. Again, you know, absolutely reach out to me with any questions or any you know, any thoughts that you have. Like I say, I have quite a bit of experience competing in both sports and then introducing it into triathlon, what athletes actually benefited from it, and which ones I felt like, okay, this probably wasn't good timing or right for this athlete, and I can help you navigate through this a little bit.
So if anybody wants this presentation, the recording will be available next week on the Power Hour page that you all registered on. And then we have a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah.
And if you guys have questions after that, you can always feel free to unmute and ask as well. It looks like someone asked, would open chair lifts be appropriate in the off season when there's less impact from swim, bike, and run to help build speed in sprint or draft legal athletes?
Absolutely. So that is absolutely when I would use it. So in that, you know, if an athlete is doing, you know, their reduced volume within their training, maybe their training load in terms of swim, bike, and run isn't that intense at that time. Maybe it's a little bit more fun and light and easier. That would be the time to incorporate this stuff. And as their workouts start to get more and more taxing and more specific towards the race season, that's when you're going to start to maybe you might start to reduce the Olympic lifts and just stick with the supplementary exercises. And then eventually, obviously, you're going to be taking it right out as they get into the real heart of their competition season. Yep.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any other questions they want to ask?
Thank you so much for your patience with the time mix up there. I really appreciate it. And again, like I say, this is just a very breaking the very tip of the iceberg on all of this stuff. So anyone who wants to get much more in depth on this and has questions or anything like that, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions or provide as much insight as possible. I'm excited that these two sports have come together and said, let's help each other out and educate the coaches. So thanks so much for having me.